Wesley class Bible study. And today we're going to be picking up at chapter 13 of chapter 22. Chapter 22 is a real eye-opener for people who want to see what cultures were like back then. You've got all kinds of things like we were just mentioning in the class. You had to help a donkey out of the ditch, no matter who it belonged to. You had to rescue animals. You had to not cross-dress. You could not take a mama bird out of a bird's nest. You could take the young, but you couldn't take the mama bird. You had to have a parapet or a fence around your roof so that people wouldn't fall off. And you couldn't blend anything. You couldn't blend fabric. You couldn't blend animals. You couldn't blend. And what this meant was that this culture wanted everything to stay exactly the same as it always was, and they didn't want there to be any confusion about, you look at somebody and you wonder if that's a man or a woman. You didn't want to have any confusion about the food that was being eaten or how it was being prepared. So these are directives that are meant to freeze society generation after generation after generation, and it did. So it also kept the Hebrews from being technologically superior to any of their neighbors. Their neighbors worked with blending metals and fabrics, and they did a lot more experimentation with things than the Hebrews did. And it's kind of interesting, like I was saying to some of the class, if you wanted something made of bronze, you couldn't get a Jew to make the bronze object because you'd have to blend copper and tin. But you could go get a bronze sword from the Philistines if you could pay for it. Okay? It didn't stop them from using that. It's just that they could not initiate it. Interesting how that works. Okay, so verse 13 has to do with virginity before marriage. Now, this is going to have some implications for us in the New Testament, so let's take a look at their rules. Suppose a man marries a woman, but after going into her, he dislikes her and makes up charges against her, slandering her by saying, I married this woman, but when I lay with her, I did not find evidence of her virginity. Okay, folks, we're going into PG-13 stuff here. Okay, just want you to know. How did they determine that? Well, someone would examine the sheets after the wedding night, and the parents of the woman would retain the sheets for evidence of blood. So if anybody accused their daughter of not being a virgin, they would bring out the sheets. So here we go. The father of the young woman and her mother shall then submit the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. The father of the young woman shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter in marriage to this man, but he dislikes her. Now he has made up charges against her, saying, I did not find evidence of your daughter's virginity, but here is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. Then they shall spread out the cloth before the elders of the town. The elders of the town shall take the man and punish him. They shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, which they shall give to the young woman's father. Okay. Because he has slandered a virgin of Israel. She shall remain his wife. He shall not be permitted to divorce her as long as he lives.
I wouldn't want him.
Does it matter?
No.
No. Back then it didn't matter. The whole thing was a contract between males. It was a contract between the eldest male in the woman's family and the eldest male in the groom's family, or with the groom, actually. So I encountered something like this when I was in Saudi Arabia. There is in the newspapers in Saudi Arabia, we have a Dear Abby column where people ask questions about etiquette and things like that. Over there, it's Dear Mullah, and so they would ask the mullah, "What do I do?" And this guy married a young lady and accused her of adultery and divorced her, which is not hard to do over there. You just say, get out 3 times. And, and sent her back to her father, okay? And because he thought that she had been adulterous, he was supposedly able to keep the dowry, okay? Turns out she wasn't. And he found out that she wasn't after the fact. So now he's asking the mullah, what do I have to do with the dowry? And the mullah said, you have to give it back to her daddy, okay? Not only that, but she doesn't have to come back to you. Okay? So that was, he seemed to be much in distress about that judgment, by the way. Just want you to know. There were other things that are a lot grosser than that I won't get into, but it's amazing what they do sexually over there, and ask the dear mullah about the consequences of it. But Abby doesn't have to deal with that sort of thing over here, or at least she doesn't publish it. Okay. If, however, this charge is true, that the evidence of the young woman's virginity was not found, then they shall bring the young woman out to the entrance of her father's house, and the men of her town shall stone her to death because she committed a disgraceful act in Israel by prostituting herself in her father's house. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. Okay, what they are trying to do is when somebody does something evil, it has implications for the whole community. And so the whole community is responsible to carry out the judgment in order to defend the community from evil. Okay? But
that just flies in the face of Jesus saying, the one who is without sin cast the first stone.
yeah, that's right. You can see how Jesus turned this thing on its head. Okay? Also, technically, they didn't mention it here, but in previous books of the Pentateuch, the man who's caught in adultery is supposed to be stoned too. And she,
never heard that.
here they're just talking about the woman. There are much fewer things written about sexual improprieties by men than women in the Old Testament. Women were held to a higher standard, but the methods of adjudicating that were terribly unfair. So let's see how much unfair it gets. If a man is caught with the wife of another man, both of them shall die. Okay, so that's in there. Okay, the man who lay with the woman as well as the woman. So you shall purge evil from Israel. So, okay, so they said, yeah, that's adulterous person is men too. If there is a young woman, a virgin already engaged to be married, and a man meets her in the town and lies with her, you shall bring both of them to the gate of the town and stone them to death. The young woman because she did not cry for help in the town, and the man because he violated his neighbor's wife, so you shall purge evil from your midst. Okay, what's the deal with this? Okay, now this is an accusation of rape, and if a woman is being raped in a town and she doesn't yell out for help, then she's considered complicit.
What if she yells and no one hears her?
Well, we'll get to that. Okay. But if in the town, somebody should be able to hear her.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
It's like if a tree falls in the woods.
Yeah. Something like, well, we're actually, yes. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing too. If a woman cries out, the men in the town are obligated to go to her rescue. Okay? And from what I can see in our society, in some places in this country, if you go to somebody's rescue, you could end up in court. Okay? So we have some communities that dissuade this kind of thing, where if you see somebody in distress, you would go automatically to the distress. What most people are doing now is pulling out their cell phones and taking a picture,
Yeah.
but they're not intervening, which doesn't do much good for the person being attacked. I mean, I've seen cell phone video of people being attacked on the subways in New York, and instead of taking pictures of it. I didn't have to run into this dilemma when I was overseas, but being a combat photographer, I didn't actually witness combat. I witnessed the battlefield right after the combat, but they, because of the command influence and other reasons, I tried not to go into the combat itself, and it's not because I was trying to back off. I had other reasons for holding back. But my sergeant did go into the combat, and then you got to wonder, do I pick up my camera or do I pick up my gun, depending on the situation. But now people are picking up cameras instead of picking up what they need to defend somebody. But it was an expectation. If a woman is being attacked, if she's in town and she yells out for help, and then she's not considered complicit. Okay? Now, but if the man meets the engaged woman in the open country and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. You shall do nothing to the young woman. The young woman has not committed an offense punishable by death, because this case is like that of someone who attacks and murders a neighbor. Since he found her in the open country, the engaged woman may have cried for help, but there is no one to rescue her. So she gets, tie goes to the runner. That's basically what we're talking about. If she's in the open country, then only the man is at risk.
Well, if you're gonna play around, you might as well, you better do it out in the
You
country.
better do it out in the country. That's right. That's right. Which, there, you look at the fine print on that, okay? But the guy is at risk. If she accuses him, and the thing is now, they're talking about a woman who is engaged. So what is the issue there?
She's already promised to someone else.
Not only that,
She won't be a virgin.
She
when
won't
they
be a
get
virgin.
married.
she won't be a virgin. And while they don't talk about the implications of this, still, it reduces dramatically the bride price for her. So there are damages done. Okay, they don't get into it in this section, but those are some of the considerations. So this is another thing. Let's move up to the New Testament. Okay. You have a situation with Mary, who is pregnant by the Holy Spirit. And this is not easy to explain. Okay? You have Joseph, who does not want to see her get stoned to death. And so what he's willing to do is to dissolve the contract with the father. If he maintains the contract, then she's liable to be stoned. Okay? If he dissolves the contract, she has an opportunity, perhaps, to stay alive, but she's no longer as valuable. Okay? Then an angel goes, talks to Joseph. Joseph, he says, go ahead and marry her. Well, if Joseph concurs and goes ahead and marries her, as far as the community is concerned, he is claiming fatherhood of the child. Okay? If he claims fatherhood of the child, he's got to pay the daddy 100 shekels. And he does not get the dowry. because he broke the terms of the contract. So I don't know how prosperous Joseph was, but coming up with 100 shekels ain't easy. So you see the situation that they find themselves in.
But if they got, and so if Joseph married her, and then she had a child 8 months later, you know, he would say, hey, it's my child.
Yes,
So I guess timing's a lot with this.
timing is a lot. Timing is a lot. They already had the engagement ceremony. They haven't had the wedding ceremony. Okay? And somewhere in between is when several things happened. One of them was that Mary had to go visit her cousin Elizabeth on the other end of Judea. Okay? Got her out of Dodge while these things were being resolved. And then you have the thing being resolved. The family turns Mary over to Joseph. Evidently, they worked out the deal. And but Joseph doesn't lie with Mary until after Jesus is born, which the Roman Catholic Church, because of a Pope's declaration, said he never lied with her, ever, during their marriage, even though Jesus seemed to have had brothers and...
boys.
Yeah, well, they've tried to rationalize through that by saying these were children by a previous marriage of Joseph's, or they were actually cousins, or something like, you know. But once the Pope speaks ex cathedra, everybody else has to fall in line and figure out an excuse for everything that you see in the Bible. It's interesting how that works over there. You know, Protestants have no problem at all acknowledging that you know, Jesus had brothers and sisters. Okay, and some of them were disciples. So that was that's how they worked. Anyway, oh, and here's one. A man shall not marry his father's wife, thereby violating his father's rights. All right. We're presuming that the father's dead. Okay, but later on, we're going to see in the book of 2 Samuel, we're going to see where there is a revolt against David. And David's son Absalom is claiming the throne. And he, evidently the revolt was large enough that David felt compelled to leave Jerusalem and go out into the countryside and marshal his forces. Absalom came into Jerusalem, took over the palace, and took over David's wives and concubines. And by assuming control over them was his justification for assuming the throne. So he violated this principle. Okay? And once he did that, I mean, the challenge to Absalom came militarily. Okay? But the challenge to Absalom could have come through the law also, that what he did was totally inappropriate. So, and you wonder why David left the women there, you know? It's kind of, I don't know. I know there were some wives that David wasn't especially attached to. But it's an interesting society. So what do you all think about this? How do we work it out today? A little differently.
I'm thankful I didn't live back then.
Especially as a woman.
Now, I got a dowry for one of my daughters. Okay? Greg, my now son-in-law, brought me little goats and cows.
Little what?
Goats and cows.
Figurines, you mean?
Figurines of goats and
Oh,
cows.
God.
And I think even a pig was in there, but I don't know how appropriate that was. But
You're saying you didn't get 100 shekels.
I didn't get my 100 shekels. Not yet, anyway. You know, the guy's a banker. I'm not going to get it.
Probably not.
But anyway, I haven't had any need to. That was a bride price, but I didn't have to. I've never had to return it, which is great.
You know, I wonder if this, of course, is such a different society and number of people, but I wonder if this held down rape and some of these things that happen now so much because of the consequences for the male and the female.
Yes.
I mean, sure, if I was living back then, I'd sure think twice about it. You know, hopefully I wouldn't even have any, that would not enter my mind to do that, but if it did, I'd certainly think about the consequences.
Well, I know that in my lifetime, they have taken rape off of the list of capital offenses. So a person might be put away for life, but a person wouldn't get the death penalty. In North Carolina, it used to be that a man would get the death penalty for committing a rape. Okay? I think, you know, we have relaxed an awful lot of the laws around sexuality. Some of them I think it's appropriate that we reduce the penalties, or in some cases even reduced whether or not something was legal in this country, given the kinds of freedoms that we claim here. But I'm not saying that all the freedoms that we claim are healthy freedoms. And I think we have, to a large extent, reduced some of the liabilities that have encouraged behavior that we shouldn't have.
You know, we've really relaxed the death penalty. Maybe that's a discussion we should have some Sunday morning,
Well, yeah.
pros and cons. I mean, you know, so how do you justify a believer in the death penalty, which I am a believer in the death penalty for certain crimes. So how do you justify that with biblical teachings?
Well, it's not
Thou
hard
shalt
to,
not kill.
well, because the killing that they're talking about in the commandment is not a death penalty, it's a murder. Okay, you shall not commit homicide. And you can see that even involuntary manslaughter is considered a homicide that you could be killed for. Okay? There are a couple of things to consider when we compare the biblical ideas about death penalty and death penalty today. For one thing, there were no jails or prisons intended to keep people for a lengthy period in that community. You didn't get a long sentence. You got incarceration prior to trial. And once a trial happened, you'd be held until they executed you, which was not long. Okay? So jails, even in the colonial period here in this country, jails were not designed to hold people for a lengthy period of time. Okay? You were held until trial, unless you could do bail. And in many cases, like in a capital offense, you couldn't get bail. But if it was a capital offense and you had what they call benefit of clergy at the sentencing, in other words, it was a capital offense like stealing a horse, okay? And they didn't necessarily want to kill you for stealing a horse. The judge could apply a benefit of clergy. And right there in the courtroom were branding irons. And they would brand you right here. And if it was, if you were a thief, it was a T. Okay? If it was, they had several different things for whatever felony it was. But all felonies in in the British colonies were capital offenses. So if you committed a felony, okay, if you committed a misdemeanor, then you weren't locked up for a period of time. If you committed a misdemeanor, you went to the district court, and the penalty would be flogging or being put in stocks or something like that for a period of time. But none of the misdemeanors were capital offenses. So, and if it was a capital offense, if they found you guilty within the next several days at least, you would be taken out and hung. And I know in Virginia that they tried not to make hangings public spectacles. They took you way out of town and hung you way out of town. But yeah, I think they're very liberal about using the death penalty because they didn't have really an alternative. Keep people from doing it again. We're going through a period now where there's going to, there's a real heavy crackdown, and there's a lot of disputes between some parts of our culture and other parts of our culture about whether or not somebody should be held prior to trial. And we're finding a lot of, I'll tell you what, if I was attacked and the guy that attacked me was let out on the street again, and then he knew that I would have to testify against him, I'd be worried. I'd be worried. So there are a lot of worried people these days. Your willingness to testify even in your own defense against somebody who's attacked you has diminished dramatically in many of our major cities. So one of the, you look at the way they treat, a rape here. A woman's got she's got a heavy burden. In another thing is the number of witnesses. Like right now under Sharia law, if a woman is claiming to be raped, she has to have several witnesses to speak up on her behalf, and they can't be women. So that still goes on in Muslim cultures and in Sharia law. So one of the things that we have to deal with here are Islamic cultures that are coming into the country that put Sharia law above civil law. And there are parts of the country where law enforcement does not go into those communities. They put themselves very much at risk if they try to enforce the law in those communities.
Where is this?
Dearborn, Michigan.
Huh?
Dearborn, Michigan.
Oh, yeah, I've heard a lot about Michigan.
The women aren't treated much differently from Old Testament, are they?
No, not in Islamic countries. Okay? Now, we can look back at these laws that exist in the Old Testament and say, well, Islam was heavily influenced by Jews, and the development of Islam is an outgrowth of Judaism. They would dispute that, I'm sure, but that's really where it came from. The whole concept of monotheism was injected into a pagan culture in the 12th century. But to a large extent, these were already cultural norms within the societies that assumed Islam. So I wouldn't put it entirely on the Old Testament, but you can see that there's a pattern here, a cultural pattern here, which probably was not terribly different from surrounding cultures when it came to matters of law. A lot of Judaic law came from Egyptian law, Babylonian law, Sumerian law. They borrowed a lot of the laws of Hammurabi, which were very, very ancient, predating Jewish culture, influenced Judaic law tremendously. So, we can say, well, look at those Jews, what they were doing. This was a common theme throughout the ancient Near East.
What about Judean law now? How is it changed more like our laws, or do they still have, I mean, not this archaic, but they still have?
If you look at civil law,
strong
if you look at civil law in Israel, yes, it has changed, okay? But if you look at different forms of Judaism in Israel, and believe me, there is a very broad spectrum. You know, you have Jews that are atheists, and then you go all the way over to Jews that are ultra-Orthodox.
How can they be an atheist?
To look at Judaism strictly as a culture.
But still call themselves Jews?
Yes. For instance, if you take a look at these laws in the Old Testament, and you take God out of them, they are just civil laws. So yes, there are secular Jews and there are ultra-Orthodox Jews, and to say that this is what the Jews think, you simply cannot do that. You cannot do that. In fact, you can't do that within most synagogues.
Well, you say, I've seen on TV, I've never seen it in person. In New York City, the Jews that have the,
They're Hasidim, yeah. They have
The
yes.
curls
They
thing?
don't cut the corners of their hair.
now why is that?
Because it's in the Old Testament. It's a way of showing your devotion to God, that you've made a vow and you're committed to God, and that's a indication of the vow. Okay, well, we'll pick it up at chapter 23, see what's in store for us there, okay?
Right.
Good to have you with us, and if you have any questions or comments or snide remarks, and hello, Mr. Sussy and Stumpy, and, yeah, okay. I'm having difficulty reading all the messages down there, but I just want you to know that I appreciate your tuning in, and we'll see you all next Sunday.
Have a good week.
I sure will. Good to